Hello, everyone. Welcome to this episode of the Superhero FX Podcast. My name is Matthew S. Fox. Joining me on the line is Paul. Paul, do you want to say hello?
Hello. I'm sitting in my car wearing my Batman t-shirt, so we're all set to go.
Well, we're you can do it from a car. You can talk from many places. There's never a way to stop the signal. Paul and I have both been going through some life changes of late. Paul has recently moved. I'm moving pretty soon myself. So our sound quality today is a little special because we're doing it in a kind of, as I said, forced environment, but kind of fitting for what we're talking about because we're talking today about a different kind of never way to stop the signal, a different kind of rebellion, Rogue One, the new Star Wars movie that came out. I really loved it. Paul, I think I want to hear your thoughts on it. And I know I walked out of Rogue One thinking that there was, a lot of great stuff that we could dive into in this podcast. So I'm really excited for this topic. And as you pointed out, this is a pretty good time to be talking about ways to rebel against imperial authority. So I think we've got a lot we can dive into. So let's just start with well, first of all, I think we should just kind of like ground ourselves in the fact I am a huge Star Wars nerd. I have been since I was a little kid. When I was young, my mother used to love to tell the story that, when I was like 4 to 8 or 9, if she had to go out of the house for an hour or two and she didn't want to have a babysitter come in, but she wanted to make sure I didn't get into trouble, she could just put the first Star Wars movie, A New Hope, to our Betamax machine, going way back technology-wise. Sit me in front
You
of
had a Betamax.
I did. Sit me in front of the television, and she knew I wasn't going to get into any trouble because I was just a huge Star Wars fan. And I have remained that pretty much throughout my life. Like everyone, I did not love the prequels. Force Awakens was kind of brought me back in a lot of ways. But Star Wars has remained a really important part of my life, both entertainment-wise, but also something that really kind of shaped a lot of my thoughts on good and evil and anger and the whole idea of the Force. And so I'm starting from this movie of like, I was really looking forward to Rogue One. What about you? I know you like I have had a pretty long, but in some ways kind of up and down journey with Star Wars.
Yeah, so my first movie memory actually is going to see Return of the Jedi when I was 5 at the Ziegfeld in New York, which was a great theater in New York, which, like most great things in New York, is now gone. But just recently closed, actually. And I remember the moment. I remember like riding up and down the escalators with my dad at the Ziegfeld, and they're like red carpets. And I remember being in the theater and seeing like Luke's lightsaber shoot out of R2-D2, and then he catches it and it's all green. It's like, why is it green? I don't know. It's green. But like, apparently because if it were blue, it wouldn't have contrasted as well against the sand on, Tatooine or whatever.
Right.
But whatever. And then in high school, I became a big Darth Vader fan. And so I'd say that the 3 original movies were always really, were kind of like important movies to me.
Mm-hmm.
I
was just saying, I remember in high school, like you and I have been having conversations like the ones we have in this podcast now for almost 20 years.
Right.
And I remember those conversations we had about Darth Vader and his role and that idea of Star Wars. I think it was some of the first you and I ever had, like of this vein.
Yeah, I think you're right. Like specifically using works of fiction and specifically science fiction, or it's basically science fiction, right?
Science fantasy.
Opera,
I think a little more science fantasy, space fantasy, but yeah. Anyway.
But it's in order to discuss the way that we think it would be nice that humans went around and conducted themselves.
Right.
And I remember sort of the moment. Well, I don't remember the moment. That's not true. But having a conversation about how in Empire, Vader kind of has a point,
Mm-hmm.
A little bit, he wants to take down the Emperor, and the Emperor's clearly an awful dude.
Right.
He's not someone who had this I just want everything to be great for everybody. So I might have to like blow up a few planets. Like that's just you just got to do what you got to do. But like you know, he's like, no, I want all the power for me. I'm a Sith Lord. Bow down. You know, and meanwhile, I think Vader always like as awful as the backstory, and that not so much the backstory as much as the prequel trilogy. I mean, I loathe the prequel trilogy. Like when the Phantom Menace came out, I was so excited, and I went to see it with my mom, and I think my aunt had just died, and so I was out in Kansas City, and it's like it was kind of a sad time in general. I was like, oh, but there's a Star Wars movie, you know, and
Yeah.
I think it was just like a few weeks after that, and I was just like, what are they doing? Like, what is up with this? The Jar Jar and the young Anakin. I was like, not
Yeah.
my Anakin.
I,
But
yeah.
like,
Yeah, I mean, the prequels are, I remember as being the first time I was truly disappointed by a movie where it had that much expectation in it, you know?
yeah,
But I also think you're right, what you were saying at the beginning, that, like, for me, and those conversations you and I were having, I think were a big part of it, Star Wars was one of the first things where I really started to understand the idea of moral grayness, you know? Because, like, it
right,
is portrayed as this, like, climactic battle of pure good versus pure evil. But then you find out that, like, Vader, like, this whole idea of does he have some goodness in him, and in Empire, like, does he, maybe Luke joining him wouldn't have been the worst thing in the world,
right. Maybe they would have been kind rulers of the Empire. We don't know.
Probably I'm gonna say not, but possible. But like,
Oh, we don't
yeah,
know.
but also just the ideas of, like, how Obi-Wan screwed up, and, like, was Obi-Wan right?
Right,
Was Obi-Wan right to lie to Luke? Like, from his
right.
perspective, it makes sense. But yeah, so I think you're right that, like, there's always been some of that kind of moral grayness, and for me at least, and I want to hear a little bit more about kind of your journey to Rogue One. But I'll just say, like, to me, that's probably more than anything the thing I loved so much about Rogue One is how much it just took that idea and ran with it and said, you know what, like, in the Empire, there are people trying to do the right thing even as they work for the Empire, and in the Rebel
Yeah,
Alliance, there are scumbags, or there are people
right,
who are
right,
just like just as dedicated to destroying the Empire as anyone else, but are willing to cut a lot of corners that a lot of other people wouldn't want to cut.
right.
So yeah, but anyways,
Yeah, and so that sort of brings us to why I think I like Rogue One better as a movie than not as a movie. I mean, just as a story, I guess.
yeah,
Than The Force Awakens.
uh huh,
Even though, like, I, I feel like the Force Awakens was like the Star Wars movie we needed, but
yeah.
like Rogue One is a Star Wars movie we deserve.
I I heard Force Awake, and let's say now, you and I can try to do like a spoiler-free thing. That's never going to work. The Anyone who hasn't
Right.
seen any of the Star Wars movies, we're probably going to have a lot of spoilers for all the Star Wars movies. Um, I know, Paul, you've seen a lot of the Clone Wars TV show. I've
Yeah,
seen some of it, but we might touch on that a little bit. So,
yeah. Which is by far the best prequel material, in my opinion.
I can see that. I can see that. But so yeah, so just a warning, there's probably going to be a lot of spoilers. If you haven't seen those things yet, go watch them, come back to this podcast. I think you'll enjoy it a lot more. Um, but no, I am with you. I think in a lot of ways, The Force Awakens to me was a palate cleanser. The Force
Right.
Awakens
Yeah.
was,
Totally.
this will get the bad taste of the prequels back in your mouth. This will allow you to trust us again. And then we can start doing some new and crazy things, you know?
Hmm.
Because I like Rogue One a lot more. I'm probably going to watch Rogue One a lot more than I am going to watch Force Awakens. But I don't think we would get. I don't think I would have been able to enjoy Rogue One if I hadn't seen Force Awakens quite as much, you know? Like,
Right. I think people would have looked upon it with a great deal of skepticism
yeah.
had the Force Awakens not, the Awaken. I don't know, whatever.
Right.
I'll sidestep the pun. But I totally agree. I think it was definitely a palate cleanser, and it sort of like prepared people to be like, okay, now you may enjoy these other things without looking upon them with the same degree of skepticism
Right.
as
When,
the prequel trilogy.
Especially because Rogue One does break with the mold in a lot of important ways. I mean, just in that very beginning, we don't have the crawl, of
Right.
exposition, and
Yeah.
I think that works for Rogue One. but it's definitely a change, and I think
Yeah,
little things like that. I think if I hadn't seen Force Awakens, I would be like, this isn't a Star Wars movie. Where's the crawl?
yeah, right, right, right. Well, that's interesting. I mean, I will say that the people I saw it with were like, "What the hell's going on?" for the first half of the movie.
I can
So
understand that.
the crawl might have actually helped with that, but
Yeah.
you know, I do think that it it did feel different, and not having that same thing in the front, and not having not really the same music throughout.
Uh huh.
I mean, it was similar, and you felt some of the themes, but it wasn't like this. The music didn't have that same presence that it has in the other movies.
Definitely.
uh, or the specific music that's in the other movies didn't have that presence here. But also, I think one thing that really sets Rogue One apart from the other Star Wars movies, and is kind of why I like it more now,
Hmm.
and why I might not have liked it as much before as I do now, is that there's no Jedi. I mean, yeah,
Yeah.
Darth Vader's like, he's kind of like a cameo, he's
Hmm.
this like presence that's sort of there, but although I'll say that I don't think they got Vader very right. Um,
My Vader doesn't make puns. Like my
yeah, yeah,
my
it just,
my
and
my.
he was like walking all kind of like jiggly, like a cowboy or something. I was just like, his legs look weird. Like I don't know. The Vader didn't feel quite right to me.
Yeah.
Um,
But I
although I loved the idea that he was there, but
no, for
um,
sure. And I love the idea of like that this is where Vader sort of becomes Vader and finds himself as Vader. Like ridiculous as that statement is, but yeah, I think it didn't quite work. But I do think you're right that I kept thinking as I was watching it about the conversations you and I have had about Daredevil and how like
yeah,
Daredevil and Jessica Jones and I had originally hoped Agents of Shield and and still somewhat Agents of
yeah,
Shield, but not as much. Those are all set like they're telling the stories of what's happening behind the scenes of the big Avengers stories, like
right, right,
Daredevil season 1, it's all about like cleaning up the mess from the first Avengers movie, and like Luke
yeah,
Cage is about like this much smaller thing. And I love those stories. I love the idea of like what's happening with the little the smaller stories off screen. And I think this is what you're getting at. To me, that's exactly what Rogue One was. It was.
yeah. That's not at all what I was getting at, but that's
Oh,
cool
okay.
too.
All right. So for you, what do you mean about in terms of it not being Jedi?
I mean, there are literally. I mean, aside from Vader's kind of cameos in here, there are no Jedi. Like
Right.
the the good guys are just a bunch of people,
Yeah.
and droids, sure. Um, but like, it's not, it's not this like the light side and the dark side, and
Hmm.
what this and that, and a bunch of like superpowers. Basically, it's
Right.
a bunch of people making decisions for how they want the galaxy to look, basically, without really. I mean, yeah, you have the guy who's all into the Force, right?
Hmm.
But he doesn't necessarily have any. I mean, he's not a Jedi, right?
Yeah.
And
I mean, the degree to which he's able to fight blind is sort of like Daredevil in that almost like on the borderline of supernatural power kind of thing. But it's
yeah,
so
for
much
sure.
it's so much less than the Jedi, and you're right, and it's treated much more like a religion, and a religion where like
Yeah,
where we don't know if the god of the religion is real, you know?
right, right. Although although we do know in
Well,
this
right,
context, right?
right.
But where they, but it is treated as a religion where there's legitimate doubt about its claims, as opposed to, in I mean, in Star Wars, that's kind of how it is in A New Hope, right?
Yeah.
You cling to that ancient religion or whatever. That what Tarkin says that to Vader? Is it Tarkin who says that?
No, it's the guy who
There's someone
who
else.
chokes. But yeah, it's that
That guy. Yeah, yeah.
your devotion to that ancient religion has not helped you find the stolen data, et cetera, et cetera.
Right. Exactly. Um, and that and Luke and Han are kind of like, really, like, how am I going to see with the blast shield in my face?
Right.
Like, but like then it's like, oh yeah, it is a thing, but it isn't until Empire, I think, that it's like so clear. It's like, oh, Vader can make things fly,
Yeah.
like, Like Luke can get his lightsaber to fly to his hand from across the room.
Right.
You know,
Yoda can do all the things, and no, and
right?
I mean, I thought the way they portrayed portrayed the Jedha, as they call them, on that on the people of the planet, was really
Yeah,
interesting because they're not presented as the absolute wonderful complete, like it could have been easy to make them like the last people keeping the story of the Jedi alive, and they're good and
right.
perfect and pure.
Yeah,
Instead, they were like a lot of the folks on that planet is, it's kind of religious fanaticism, in a way that I
yeah,
thought
yeah.
was really interesting to portray, because here you have people who are fighting for the rebellion, in the name of the Force,
Hmm.
and they're basically terrorists. I mean, they're terrorists for cause we
Right.
support with, but they're IEDs. They're using flat out, like, to me that scene was
Yeah,
very
and
intentionally. I mean, it looks like Afghanistan.
right, right, right. And I mean, they're conquered people. They're conquered by an empire,
Right.
that has this massive military that just, it's like, yeah, there are real parallels there, that maybe could make people think about some things.
Yeah. I mean, a friend of mine, I saw it. I saw the movie like a few days before this happened, but a friend of mine pointed out that she had seen the movie like within the first week of the movie coming out, the
Yeah,
Syrian city of Aleppo fell, and
right.
with horrible devastation done to the citizens.
Yeah,
And a friend of mine saw the movie a day after that and said that was all she could think about during those scenes. And I thought that was
yeah, yeah.
that was not unintentional.
Yeah, I'm sure, I'm sure. And I mean, it's not like Aleppo wasn't already uh, having horrible things going on.
Yeah,
I mean,
exactly.
it was a war torn city already.
Hmm.
Um, although I don't know when they did the actual filming, but yeah, I mean that's been
Yeah,
going
yeah.
on
I mean,
for
obviously the fact that
maybe
they didn't time the release with the war. I mean, that was not.
sure,
Uh,
sure.
but it was just. But you're
They're
right.
like,
But it's
now can you retreat? We're about to put this movie out, so
yeah,
you know,
not. But I did think it was really interesting, like the way
or did they?
we're not going that deep on conspiracy theories. Disney does have global control in some ways, but I'm not going to go quite
Pretty
that
much.
far. But but yeah, but I want to talk more about that because I think that's, to me, one of the things that I thought was just most striking about the movie was the way it got into the morality of rebellion, in both good and bad ways.
Right.
And maybe that's a good way to start. Is like with the folks who are on Jeddah, like fighting the rebellion in their own way. Like what was your takeaway from sort of how that was portrayed?
I mean, yeah, if people are coming to, you know, take all your stuff and destroy, destroy your home and take all your natural resources, like you blow them up. Like, of course you do, right?
Hmm.
Like, and if you're massively outgunned, of course you engage in, what people call terrorism.
Yeah.
But it's like that's how the American Revolutionary War was fought,
Oh yeah.
right? Largely,
Hmm.
that's how Vietnam was fought by the Vietnamese and by the Viet
Yep.
Cong, and I mean that's how you fight a battle on your home turf when you're like if you're on equal military footing, you have a huge advantage on your home turf,
Yeah.
right?
Definitely.
I mean, in theory. So when there is a conflict, generally the attacker is going to have superior military strength. I
Hmm.
would imagine, right? I mean, I haven't studied enough military history to really know that that's true, but it just seems like it would make sense.
That seems about right.
So whoever's trying to defend, well, any struggle that lasts more than briefly, right? There's going to have to be a great amount of military power on the side of the invader. So in order to defend, you're going to have to either find a way to drastically increase your military power, either by recruiting more people or by gaining some sort of technology, or you're going to have to engage in what people often refer to as terrorist tactics. Although we should note that they are attacking actual military targets, right?
Right.
I mean,
Well,
which
I think, and that
is
was,
bullshit.
yeah, I mean, that was one of the things that I thought was most interesting about those scenes is, for the most part, they're seen as attacking military targets, but they're attacking them
Mhm.
in the middle of a crowded market, where there's a
Right,
very high
right.
potential for the kind of collateral damage that I think we often think of
Yeah,
as one of the worst parts of terrorism.
right,
Um,
totally, totally.
and yeah, I mean, because I agree with you. I think that well, I somewhat agree with you in that I think that there's just that word terrorism, the way we apply it. The
It's an awful word.
it's an awful word, and it's a word that in a very specific context has a lot of meaning. Like the idea of using terror and fear to convince people to go along with the political position you want. Like
Right.
that's one thing. A
That's
a
an actual thing.
Yeah,
Yeah.
a vastly outnumbered group of people realizing that they don't have the army to just stand and fight and meet on a battlefield and thus have to use guerrilla tactics. Like, to me, that's a fundamentally different thing, and we use those words in the exact same way. And as you said, by the definition, to the British, I was actually reading some history, like the British described, I don't think the word terrorism was being used, but
Right.
the British were horrified by the way
Yeah.
that the American colonialists were fighting. The like shooting the soldiers on the road from Concord to Lexington from the trees, dressed up in camouflage. That was
Right, right, right.
horribly offensive. And certainly
Like, that's so ungentlemanly.
right. But the other side of it is like when you say, well, yes, the gentlemanly thing to do is to have your army of 1,000 people meet our army of 20,000 people on the field of battle and just have it out in a fair fight. Most
Right.
most of the time, the people who are asking you to have a fair fight are the ones who know it's never going to be a fair fight.
Right,
Um,
exactly.
and to me, that was like because I walked out of it thinking, like, how does this movie shift our perceptions of what people are doing in Afghanistan or in Iraq, where, I mean, it's not to me, it doesn't justify it, and especially because in a lot of those places, like I think some of the causes that are being used are really problematic. Are those things that are being used in defense of are really problematic. The Islamic State and the like, but. But it also
Yeah.
makes it a lot harder to just sort of stand and say, "Oh, well, IEDs are always and forever wrong and bad." Well,
Right.
sometimes,
You have to pay for your explosive devices.
yeah, like
Full
sometimes,
market value.
sometimes that's the best someone can do. And to me, that was just really powerful seeing that because it, granted, like the stuff Yoda says has moral power for me. Like when he says
Right.
in Empire, like, fear and suffering, it's the way to the dark side. I can feel the connection for that. But I can't remember a time where a Star Wars movie had such a kind of direct political parallel to an event happening in the real world.
Yeah. Yeah, I agree. I mean, it's like when the Phantom Menace came out, that was what, like the late '90s.
Uh
Like
huh.
we had the internet boom. We had like, you know, that was probably during the whole impeachment thing, or that was after that. I don't know. I mean, but we had Clinton, who was what, an impeached president by
Right.
then, I think.
Mm-hmm.
Um, over like, I mean, oh, come on. But it was like things. I mean, everybody had the whole Millennium Fever.
Right.
Like, oh, Y2K, Y2K. But like things like seemed pretty rosy in a lot of ways. I think
Mm-hmm.
for a lot of people. I'm sure not for everybody. I mean, as I said, my aunt had just died and my uncle had just died, but like in terms of like the global outlook, it felt like, like in terms of prosperity, and like basic freedoms and whatever, I certainly didn't have the same level of, questioning how long those would be around.
Right.
I mean, I've always, like, since I was 5, I was like, wait, this is the world? Fuck you guys! Like,
Yeah.
who made it this way? But I do think that there were certain things that I'd say I always took for granted that I don't take for granted the same way. Like the people talking about a surveillance state, that seems more of a hypothetical, and hyperbole. And now
Right.
it's like, no, we do live in the surveillance state, like not quite as hyperbolically as a lot of science fiction might portray, but like not nearly as far away as we were 20 years ago,
Oh yeah.
you know?
What?
Um,
And
and
go
a
ahead.
police state and militarized police and all these things.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, I admit that was a big part of I think why the movie hit me so hard is because, to me, some of the best scenes in the movie, and it kind of like what we talked about in Jeddah, but also even more later, is where different people who all think the Empire is terrible are debating like how far are you willing to go to fight this empire? Both in
Right.
terms of like what do you think is acceptable to do to fight the empire, and also like what are you willing to risk to fight the empire? And there's real
Yeah.
division about that. To
Okay.
me, I think it's really important that anybody, wherever they are on the political spectrum, can be a part of this conversation. That's great, and I certainly want to hear from you if you see it differently. But I'll be very clear about where I'm coming from. When I see the idea of like how do we fight the empire, and I'm thinking of it in terms of how do we fight Trump, because that's
Right.
the and I think those are the conversations that progressives are already having of are how much are we going to fight only within the legal means, or are we going to start doing like protests and tax boycotts and things like that, and what are we willing to risk to fight the Trump administration? And I just watching like that Council of War, it brought all that back for me.
Yeah, I think it obviously has very clear parallels to where we are now. I do think I think that I think people are missing a little bit the fact that it's not just a Trump occupation of the
Hmm.
White House. It's I mean I think the entire Republican Party has just gone off the rails
Sure.
and
And again,
just
I don't want to
decided
get us
that
too, I don't want to get us too deep into our own personal politics, but yeah, go on.
sure, but uh it's like there's one side that's decided we're not going to play by the rules anymore.
Hmm.
When the other side then decides, well, but we're still going to play by the rules,
Yeah,
they've given themselves a massive disadvantage.
it really
They've
is.
ceded a huge advantage to the other side, and I think that's a huge problem in American politics right now. But also in terms of the metaphor between specifically Trump and the Empire,
Hmm.
he's not Darth Vader.
Yeah.
Like Darth Vader is kind of cool and very conflicted character who has great powers of a Sith Lord. He's Kylo Ren.
Yeah.
You know, he's the whiny little bitch who wants to live up to his daddy, really.
Right.
And the way Kylo Ren wants to live up to his granddad, and I just think that's an important point. Like,
Yeah.
I just can't let people draw Darth Vader to Donald Trump references.
No, I'm
Just
with you.
because
I think
like Vader.
if there's any connection there, it's Kylo Ren. I would not use the word bitch in that context, but I do know what you mean. And I also think that's in some ways actually that might be the one part of the Empire, the whole Star Wars story that I think doesn't quite fit with reality because in Star Wars, and granted, there's a whole idea of like the Emperor is using his Sith power to prop it all up and the like,
Right,
but I think
right,
there's often an idea of like, if only we could have killed Hitler, Nazi Germany wouldn't have happened. If only we could
right.
get rid of Trump, we would be okay. And if we kill the Emperor, then everything is going to get back to normal. And
Right.
granted, there is a great military victory they win, but I often think that's a real problem because that the reality is if we get rid of Trump, we get Pence. Not really a step up in a lot of ways.
Right. It's
You
a
know,
step
it,
to the side and it's
yeah.
in a different direction of,
If,
of
if if
uh,
someone had assassinated Hitler in 1937 or 38, like, yeah, maybe the world's a little bit different because he's such a demagogue. But like the
right.
whole the whole like situation that had been so ready for someone to step into power like that in Germany is still there. Some other demagogue's
Yeah.
going to step up. Um, and yeah, and I think we can apply that same thing in the Star Wars world of like, okay, well, Palatine is dead, but you still have because I think that, and to me, this is the thing that this is the thing that I think is almost one of the greatest sins of the prequels is that they got this so wrong. Is
Mhm.
the story that I wanted the prequels to tell is that because of all of this confusion and chaos and really difficult situation happening throughout the galaxy, people were willing to let they want when one strong man said, "I will keep you safe, don't worry." They were willing to give up their freedom for that safety. And
Right.
it's an old story, but it's such a powerful one, and Star Wars had such a good opportunity to tell that story in the subtle, nuanced way that it needs to be told, so that people could say, "Oh yeah, look at how those planets were willing to give up their power to the Emperor." look at how dangerous that is. What can we learn about that today? And instead, they totally screwed it up and made it about Jar Jar Binks and all that long rant.
Yeah,
But
and that all of the whole struggle, the whole separatist versus republic struggle, which I think you can't, like, they explore a little bit in the animated series Clone Wars,
yeah,
and which you can definitely get into about how the separatists aren't necessarily wrong, the republic's not necessarily wrong.
yeah,
Like, I think if the republic is a properly functioning body that does what it should be doing, then it should have sway over the whole galaxy, because I think the republic's job should be to make sure that none of the local planetary governments or whatever are oppressing or exploiting their people.
right.
But if you have a republic that's corrupt, or if you have a republic that's not doing those things, it's serving maybe corporate interests or whatever, or it just has no real power, then the individual member states are totally justified in being like, well, we don't want to be a part of you because you're not doing what you're supposed to be doing.
Yeah,
And I think there's a really interesting story there that they didn't really tell. Instead, they're like, ooh, Palpatine has Dooku, and then Dooku is leading the Separatists, and it just becomes this giant evil plot instead of a complex political situation.
Yeah, we've talked about this before, and I've actually written an article about this for the blog that's associated with this podcast. But to me, that the moment, I mean, there were so many bad moments in those prequels, but the moments where I truly gave up on them was when you see that Count Dooku is working for Palpatine. Because, like,
Right.
at least if he is someone who truly believes in the separatist movement, then the story is so much richer, as you're saying, because then it's these people think that they're right, and that's always a story that I'm much more interested in, is when people are doing terrible things because they think that they're right. And I like that in Rogue One we see, I mean, I can't remember, like, yeah, Han Solo is portrayed as a little bit of a scoundrel, and, like, that's why him shooting first is so important. But
Right.
I can't, to me, like, Han shooting first is so much less than our hero, who Diego Luna, who I can't remember his character's
Yeah.
name. He flat out kills a guy in the first 10 minutes of a movie. Like, not shoot, like, he just flat out, like, you're going to be a liability to me. Got to just off you right now.
Yeah.
I was like,
oh, you can't climb here, and you have this information. Okay, you got to go.
yeah. So, what did you think of that moment?
I thought it was. If I had a little more context, I think I would have appreciated it more.
Uh-huh.
I did like it. I liked that character a lot overall. I found him a pretty compelling character. I liked that we never got his whole backstory.
Yeah.
He was just like, yeah, my life, bad stuff too. Like, don't make assumptions that like, you're the only person who's been through whatever. But, like, we're not, like, burdened with, like, a 10-minute flashback sequence or whatever.
Right.
And there's a moment in another show that I have at some point recommended people see, that's very similar, where there's a character who's, working undercover, basically, and they want, and they get some information or something from a source, and then they want to protect that source, right? And they're trying to help him get away, but then the guy, like, breaks his ankle or twists his ankle or something, and he's just like, well, you're not going to be able to get away, and you're going to blow my cover if they find you. So he just shoots him. He just kills him, because it's like, the goal, his goal was to, like, prevent, nuclear apocalypse, basically.
Right.
And so, when that's your goal, it's like, yeah, maybe you just kill someone when that's the only way you see to achieve your goal,
Mm-hmm.
And then you have to live with that. And then, as viewers, we see, like, well, you're not all like about your moral code, or maybe you are, but, like, your moral code isn't like, thou shalt not kill. Like, you're a CIA agent or whatever. You're a member of a rebel alliance, trying to rebel against a galactic empire. Like, yeah, you're gonna have to. I mean, you don't have to, but, like, in order to have the best chances of succeeding in defeating this enormous empire, that's led by like Jedi wizards basically.
Uh-huh.
Which I guess they don't know that how powerful the Empire or right.
Tangent alert,
the Sith are,
tangent alert.
yeah, but the point being like that they know that there's this massive power against them, and it's like in order to maximize your chances of success, like you're probably going to have to do things that like you're not crazy about.
Yeah.
Like in a vacuum, you'd be like, nah, that's not me. And you're like, well, I gotta do what I gotta do.
And I thought it was so interesting because, a lot of the times the movies we see, like especially, it's something that drives me crazy about a lot of the Marvel superhero movies is someone like the Nick Fury character wants our character is basically saying like, look, you have to do something morally gray for the greater good. And our
Right.
hero is always going to say, no, I can figure out a way to do this and still be perfectly morally pure. And it always kind of makes me roll my eyes a little bit. And
Yeah.
but on the flip side, it would be easy to sort of do it in a way that says, no, it is completely morally justified for this character to do this thing, even though it seems terrible.
Right.
And Rogue One seemed pretty comfortable saying, like, yeah, we're not going to try and answer that question either way. We're going to show you
Yeah.
that a lot of heroes have dirty hands and dirty consciences, and we're not apologizing for them, but we're also not going to hide that. We're just saying,
Right.
here they are.
Yeah, I think that's some of certainly my favorite kind of fiction. I mean, I'm tempted to say the best kind of fiction, but that's subjective. But I think it's much better for a piece of fiction to pose a question, and sometimes to kind of give a nudge this way or that way, and to explore that question sometimes, or sometimes just let it sit.
Yeah.
But I think it's much better to just kind of ask the question and be like, okay, go ahead and think about this.
Yeah.
Than it is to be like, this is the thing, this is our point. And I think sometimes it's more effective at reaching people than just being like, this is our point, this is our point, this is our point.
Oh yeah, because you walk out, you and I have talked about this just with regard to like Captain America: Civil War, that you and I saw that movie and came out with different perspectives on it. And I think that's I've heard a lot of different people have very different ideas about, what does Rogue One tell you about what is acceptable in terms of how to have a rebellion, and I just think that that's awesome because that's such a great way of changing these dynamics of conversations. What? So anything more on that?
Yeah, I mean, I don't think it tells you anything.
Yeah.
I think it gives you a bunch of thoughts to think about, and then, it leaves you to make up your own mind, which I think is great.
Definitely. Well, and so let me dive into one of the things that I've heard a lot of people debate. The father? I'm so terrible with names. Erso.
Right.
Galen Erso, is that his name?
Sure.
Okay. The engineer father.
I remember keep hearing the names in it, and I was just like, what's your name?
Yeah, it just and I love that like Star Wars like it would feel weird if it was like Bill and Michael and Janet.
Bob.
But
exactly.
but it also
Bob and his daughter Jane. Like,
it makes it harder to keep the track of the names. But yeah, okay. So what do you think of what he did? Does he make the right decision? In terms of the like deciding that he is, he's not just going to like refuse and be killed. He is going to help them build the Death Star, but he's also going to build it with this fatal weakness.
Right. I mean, assuming that he's correct, that there are other people who would do it and that they would get it done.
Right.
And then they would get it done faster than they would get it done with him in there. Like, yeah. I mean, I think any good rebellion needs some spies.
Yeah.
Needs some saboteurs, and that's basically what he is. He's a saboteur who's going to basically make sure that, that when they build the thing that they're definitely going to build, that it doesn't work quite the way they want it to, and that if, his daughter can manage to climb to the top of some radar tower and beam something up to a spaceship, which will then send it to another spaceship on like a floppy disk or whatever, then that spaceship will send it on a droid into a desert where, the last Jedi will find it, or the potential last Jedi will find it and then give it to the actual last Jedi, who will then teach him to be a Jedi, and then he'll take, one shot and blow up the thing. Yeah, I think he was totally right.
There might be a little bit of results-oriented thinking happening there in terms of how accurate he was in his prediction.
Right.
But yeah, I mean, I think it's I was talking after that same friend who made the comment about Aleppo. Her name is Robin. Also, I thought made a really fascinating comment where she was talking about, thinking about like people in who are today like in the modern weapons industry, who are or who
Yeah.
are anybody who's working
Right.
in the
Right.
Defense Department or the State Department.
Mm.
And
Yeah.
your thought is, and okay, probably most of them are not going to try to like actively sabotage the American military, but it's a
No.
similar question of like, do you just say, I refuse to have anything to do with the Trump administration and then let anyone else come in? Or do you say, I'm going to stay and try to like be a little bit of a force, like throw some things into the gears every now and then to try to slow down the move towards something terrible or try to like be a little bit of a reasonable voice in the middle of it?
Yeah. I mean, I think I was going to go with more of a Mitt Romney comparison,
Yeah,
but
that's pretty fair.
I mean, in terms of like, if you get offered Secretary of State by a state that you think is at best on the wrong track, like if if you're I don't know, if you're Hillary Clinton, you don't take that position. But if you're Mitt Romney, and in a lot of issues you're actually closer, but you think you can maybe be a buffer to some of the worst of what an administration can do, like you're probably a person who should do that.
Yeah,
And in terms of being in the defense, I mean, if you're in the defense industry in the first place, like that's its own thing.
right.
But if you think that the American military generally does good things, and you're worried that it's going to do some bad things under the incoming administration, then I think what the most sensible thing to do. I don't know. I mean, you basically have a choice. You have two options, and it's like, can you stomach going along up until the point when you say no? This is beyond that, which is okay, or do you just say, I'm not going to have any part of this? And I think they're both actually reasonable
Yeah,
ways to go about. I think if your goal is to defeat whatever negative action you think might happen, then actually going along with it until the point where you can actually take an action that'll make a difference
hmm,
is maybe strategically more effective. Whereas I think if if you're higher ranking, or if there's like something you can do, if you can mobilize like half of the people in your field to like have some massive kind of protest against the legitimacy of something,
right.
then that's one thing. But as just an individual act, it's probably not very effective. It's probably more of a salve to your own conscience. Whereas, I mean, there's a point at which, like, a military coup is a thing that actually makes sense.
Yeah,
And
I
we can just look at like
Right.
Turkey instead for a
Mhm.
moment. Just like they actually have a history of the military, of military coups to reinstitute democracy,
right.
because the people have this habit of electing demagogues, or people who become demagogues, that get more and more Islamist and more authoritarian, and then the army, the military steps in and they're like, whoa, we're removing you from power. Okay, now have a new election because you're violating the Constitution.
Right.
That's the thing, is that if the president is supposed to uphold the Constitution, and then the president's ignoring the Constitution, then the military's duty is not to obey the president. It's to, I mean, it's like when you're given an order that contradicts the whole structure upon which you getting orders and following them is based,
Mhm.
then you're not supposed to follow that order.
Yeah, and I think that's an important point. And you've mentioned Turkey before, and I've said I don't know enough about the situation to know if I agree with you in terms of like how much we can say like that what the military is doing is a good thing there. But I think that the general idea, I mean, there was a military coup against Hitler's Germany, in 1944,
Right.
and I think there's no one in the world who would ever say like the world wouldn't have been a better place if that hadn't succeeded. You know.
Right.
And I think, especially tying it back to Urso.
Well, with some Nazis, maybe. But
Yeah, exactly. But tying it back to Urso in the in this movie, I it's one of those things where I feel like I couldn't possibly sit in judgment of him either way. I mean, first of
Right.
all, I will say, if nothing else, I love the fact that they use that to tie up one of the biggest plot holes of the first movie, which is how in the world did the Empire did this huge Death Star was so easily destroyed. Um,
Right. Yeah, yeah, yeah,
so I
yeah.
thought that was kind of just a brilliant writing thing, but also just I walk out of the movie and all I feel is sympathy for Ursa.
Mm,
I would have actually
right.
loved to see so much, especially because he winds up by the end not only doing this thing with the Death Star, but he does, just like you were saying, he convinces at least one other person that this is wrong and they should join the pilot. Um,
Right.
and I kind of wish, yeah, the movie was already long, and I'm not saying they should have been a lot longer, though there are some scenes that could have been cut. But I would have loved to see the scene in which Urso convinces the pilot to to take this risk. Like
Oh, yeah, yeah.
what's the process of like, and are there others in the Empire who are like, well, yeah, like some galactic stability is good, but blowing up planets maybe not so cool. Um,
Right, exactly.
because I think that's
Like, what's the Death Star operator like recruiting process look like?
right. I have to think that I mean, granted, you get to wear that
One into
you get to wear that really awesome helmet. I always thought the kind of very cylindrical both directions helmet that the guy who pushes the
right,
button.
right.
It's an awesome
Yeah,
looking
it's like
helmet.
want to travel to crazy places and destroy them. Want to wear crazy helmets and
Yeah,
get blown up? We've got the job for you.
exactly. But it's
Want to meet Darth Vader? No, you probably don't. He might choke you to death.
not a great job security there. Um,
No.
but yeah, but it just I just to me he was in a lot of ways my favorite, not my favorite character, but the character I just thought was so morally interesting because
Yeah.
I don't honestly know what I would do in that kind of a situation. Like I hope I would do, I hope certainly that I wouldn't just be afraid and just totally going along with it. But in
Right.
terms of like, is it better just to like refuse to participate in any way and make them kill you and hope that other people do the same and just eventually, like they run out of people to kill and they have to stop, like
Yeah.
that makes a lot of sense. But also the like, do you work within the system? And because to me it's the exact same question now of like, do I just refuse to pay taxes and refuse to have any allegiance to a Trump government and thus put myself in harm's way, or do you work within the system and like still keep going to like Congress and acknowledge the legitimacy of a presidency but then work to sabotage it from within? I mean,
Right.
that his debate is, I think, one that has a lot of resonance for us today.
Yeah, I agree. And honestly, I think the answer is a question. It's like, who are you? You
Yeah.
know, who are you? What do you do? Where can you have more effect? Um, are you trying to take whatever action to make yourself feel better,
Hmm.
or are you trying to have an actual impact on the world, the situation? And if you're taking a particular action, can you get other people to do that?
Right.
You know, like I can say, okay, I'm not going to pay my taxes this year, or that's not actually the way I would put it. I'm not going to pay any federal taxes this year, right?
Right.
There's a bunch of ways of going about that. There's just refusing and then maybe getting arrested, right?
Hmm.
There's not making more than the poverty level, right? Which is like an interesting sort of form of protest.
I mean, I figured out a great way of not paying taxes. I'm just really poor.
Yeah.
But yeah, that's a different story
Right,
entirely.
not making any money. Exactly. That's what I'm saying. Like,
Right.
if half the country basically took a vow of poverty and said, we're not going to make enough money to pay, income tax,
Right.
like, what are you going to do?
Well, especially because
um,
that's very tied into. I mean, to do that, you're also basically talking about like a basic like national boycott. Of people
Yeah,
just
yeah.
refusing to work, which is something that's been done in a lot of other countries and causes a country to grind to a halt.
Right, and honestly, I think that's like, sure, call your senators, fine. Like, I'm not against that. Like, go out in the street and protest, fine. I'm not against that. Like, but if you really want to create great change, like big sweeping change, like you need to make things stop.
Yeah.
Like, not just make traffic stop on like the I-5 or whatever. I'm in California. So, I use California reference.
Well, which may well soon become the People's Republic of California, and which is another.
Exactly.
You guys need Count.
In which case, I've got a couch you can come visit.
You guys need a Count Dooku who's not working for Emperor Palpatine to run your separatist movement.
Yeah.
Okay, maybe that analogy breaks down, but well.
Yeah, I'm not sure about Count Dooku,
but here's actually the thing I kind of like most about what you're saying, though. Because I do even there, like, I don't want to tell everybody you should all stop working or you should, because I have a lot of privilege that allows me to do the things that I'm doing, and like that's not the right choice for everyone. But as you said, like, the Galen Erso question, it really asks who are you and what's going to be right for you. To me, that's so relevant because I think I don't walk away from the Rogue One thinking this was the person who was the best rebel and everyone should have rebelled the way he did or she did.
Right.
I walk away thinking every person is experiencing the Empire in a different way and is going to find a different way of rebelling against it, and that's okay. There isn't any one. And
yeah,
frankly, as I watch...
The thing about rebelling against something is that there's a lot of ways to do it.
Well,
all the ways that are not following whatever it is that they want you to do, those are all rebellion.
Right. And frankly, as I watch liberals and progressives, and I'll admit I've fallen into this trap a few times myself, start, moving from discussing and debating to really attacking each other for not fighting back in the right way.
Right.
It just, do you remember, it's now been a couple weeks and happily it's kind of blown over, but like one of the first things that happened after Trump was elected was there was this whole thing about how people should wear safety pins as a sign of like, hey, I'm a safe person. Yeah. And then a lot of people were like attacking that and saying it was so dumb and so bad and anyone who'd do it was a terrible person. And it made me want to tear my hair out because here we were, instead of saying like, there's this terrible thing happening, how do we fight against it? Instead it became, let's attack each other for not fighting against it in the right way, And that part of the movie also resonated with me for that because it's, we're not all Galen Erso, we're not all Jay Erso, we're not all going to fight back in the same way.
Yeah. Yeah, I agree, and I think there are certain things where getting a large volume of people to rebel in the same way is the way you have a successful rebellion.
Right.
Like to harken back to V for Vendetta, which we did an episode on.
Right.
If only like 2 people showed up in their V mask,
you shoot. The Empire shoots them and moves on. End of story.
Right. Or they just hit them with a rifle butt. They're like, "What are you doing?" You know. But like, if a huge mass of people come like that, then they're not going to just shoot everybody because they don't have enough bullets.
Yeah.
And it's and not just for that, but that's one reason. And if I think like 2 guys not paying any federal income tax isn't going to shut the government down.
Yeah.
It's not going to make anyone really deeply reconsider anything.
Wait, you mean
it's going to make?
You mean 100 people listening to this podcast isn't going to be what changes global history? What are we doing?
Well, it's going to make me feel better to be able to say I didn't pay for that wall.
Right.
Like I didn't pay for those bombs to go, do whatever. Like I did pay for the bombs for the last however many years, and it's actually really made me reflect on that more. Like thinking like, like I would much rather. I mean, the thing is, there's a bunch of different ways to legitimately not pay any federal income tax, right?
Right.
One of them is, I think, to lose about $1 billion in a business deal.
We'll call that the Edelston manner.
Right. You can donate up to half of what you make, and then if what you make is less than the poverty threshold, but then you don't have any money. Basically, almost all of these options end up in being broke.
Right.
Which is fine, and that's a choice. And a lot of people don't have a choice of being broke or not being broke. They're just broke, and so they're like, yeah, okay, I'm not paying any federal income tax.
Mm-hmm.
And that's not really going to be what changes things. It would have to be a large number of people who are already contributing a lot, withholding that contribution, whether it's in the form of not paying or it's in the form of not working, and saying, no, I'm not going to do anything, until these grievances are addressed. And maybe things have to get a lot worse before people are willing to do things like that. and I think that's probably true.
What
Um,
and one thing that the movie really hit home for me because I don't know if this would work in real life, but I really have to hope it is because it's one of the only things I think that can work. Is in the climactic scene of the movie, kind of what happens is she tries to convince everyone to Jay tries to convince everyone to like take part in her grand attack to get the plans, and they all say no.
right.
So she just goes ahead and does it anyway. And
Yeah.
other
Yeah.
people who like didn't want to agree to it in theory see her doing it and are like, okay, well now we're gonna follow her, And
Right.
I kind of wonder that sometimes, like if instead of trying to convince 100,000 people to all stop working, if a small group stopped working and let people know and make people see it, is that actually is it better to just go start doing it and get people to notice and get them to follow instead of just like getting the whole war council on board first? Because I want to think that works, and I hope that that works, but I'm not really sure.
Well, yeah. I mean, so obviously, it's a work of fiction.
Yeah.
Like
Wait, really?
in a lot of yeah, in a lot of other scenarios, like they'd go off, they'd all die, they'd fail on their mission, and everybody would live unhappily ever after, except for the people who are dead. And they're like, well, at least I tried.
Yeah.
But they're dead, so they don't say anything. Well, unless they're Force Ghosts, I don't know. It's a Star Wars world,
Yeah.
but the thing is that I think trying to get a bunch of people to go along with what you want to do is a great thing to do.
Yeah.
But using their refusal, the collective refusal of the masses, basically, to follow what you think is an effective form of protest or of rebellion or whatever. I don't think you can use that as an excuse not to do it yourself.
Yeah.
And I do think that if you just go ahead and do it, some other people will think about it
Mm-hmm.
for sure, and some of them might do it, and some of them won't. And I mean, just drawing from my personal life, like when I was 5, I found out that people ate animals, and that was just like a thing. And I was like, I think that is a ridiculous thing. I'm not going to do that. And I'd like to be able to convince everybody that, it's a ridiculous thing and we shouldn't do it. I think only one time in my life have I really actually tried to convince an individual person,
Right.
and that was because that was a person who so was so in love with animals and saw animals as people that I was just like, this doesn't really match up with what you seem to, feel or believe. And they agreed with me and then just did that. But it was like they made that choice for themselves because, like all I did was basically raise a question,
Right.
and I think people have to find their own answers. The best we can do is like kind of suggest things. But I think when people find their own answers, like I have other friends who became vegetarians because they were dating a vegetarian, and like that was really the whole reason,
Well,
and like then they broke up with that person, they stopped being a vegetarian. Like that's not. But okay, I'm going to ramble back to where I started, which is that I just stopped doing what I thought people shouldn't do,
yeah.
and over the last 33, 34 almost years, more and more people have made the same choice.
Yeah.
I'm not going to say my decision affected any particular number of those people, but I will say that my decision, along with all the other people who made the same decision, made it easier for the next people to do that, made it easier for the next people to do that. Like now it's super easy to be vegan, whereas 20, 30 years ago, it was hard to just be vegetarian, just in terms of like food availability and options. And
that alone, I think, oh, go ahead.
Just so the point is that I think it's often a very gradual thing where you can create what effectively is a mass protest by gradually adding numbers and making it easier, making it sort of more socially acceptable for the next person to then say, okay, I want to do that too.
Right. And I think that's that last part. I mean, I know, I'm obviously not a vegetarian, and you and I have had conversations about a lot of that and kind of just agreed to see things differently. But there's also an extent to which my conversations with you, along with some other people, were a big part of what moved me a lot closer to my, like only eating ethically raised animal kind of positions that I hold a lot now. And
Yeah.
part of that was talking to you about your philosophy, but also part of it is because I used to feel like, well, a good meal has to involve meat. And like going to enough vegan restaurants with you made me realize like, no, actually like you can have a very enjoyable meal that doesn't have any kind of animal product. And I just didn't know that was
Right.
possible. And
Yeah.
and that sounds like a kind of crazy analogy, but I think that is very similar. Is it's that same like, you know, there are people at that war council with Mon Mothma who are really like, sure, we would love to fight the Empire, but it is just not possible. There's nothing we
Right.
can do. And when
Yeah.
she
We just
starts to be
can't do
like,
it.
no, we can do it. Look, we can. Like it makes
Yeah.
people
We
start.
are doing it.
And I think it's that same thing in a lot of ways now. I think there are just things that people are like, no, we have to play by the rules. We have to be, um, we have to do the right thing in fighting Trump. And like, I mean, I love so much of what Michelle Obama has been saying for so many years, but in a lot of ways like that, when they take the low road, we take the high. Part of me is just like, no, no, like low road. Let's get back on that,
Yeah. When they
like,
take the low road, we dig a tunnel.
yeah,
You know.
like I mean, there's an article that I'm hoping I will. Neither me nor Paul has been writing quite as much as we would like to, in terms of promised projects. But there's an article that I'm working on that will hopefully come out this week or early next. That's basically about like why we've got to stop being Commissioner Gordon and start being Batman. And to
Yeah.
me, it's a lot of the same idea of like, at some point you got to decide to stop working within the rules and start recognizing in some ways, like I almost think, like to draw a parallel back to our own world, the stupidest thing Palpatine probably does is disbanding the Imperial Senate. Because if he'd kept the Imperial
Huh.
Senate,
Yeah.
like, what an interesting story would it have been if people had been like, no, what we have to do is file a formal protest in the Imperial Senate bureaucracy against the destruction
Right.
of Alderaan, and that was bad, and there should be a motion of censure against him in the Senate. And you're like, the guy just destroyed a planet. Like, it's not time
Right.
for senatorial bureaucracy anymore?
Right. But they would still. I mean, they'd still be doing that.
Yeah,
Right? I mean, that's the thing.
that's what's happening today?
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah. And I mean, no one's destroying planets just yet.
well,
Well,
no, no,
humanity collectively is destroying a planet.
slowly, but it's
At least
happening.
for its own. Yeah.
Um, so
Own
so let
houses.
me one more like big issue that I want to make sure we talk about because I know it's one you and I have talked about a lot before, and I was really happy with how the movie did it. Representation. Issues of representation are one you and I have both a lot of feelings on that somewhat agree, somewhat don't. In terms of like kind of gender and racial and things like that.
Right.
In terms of like cast and characters, what did you think of how that was done for this movie?
Yeah. I mean, it's good. I think it. It's interesting that when the first preview came out and it was so centered around Jim, I want to say, and I saw one friend of mine like, another Star Wars movie with a female lead,
Mm-hmm.
and which is kind of like, so it's the second Star Wars movie of leads and has a female lead,
Yeah.
like, but
If you wanted to
and then
say,
more recently, I've actually seen that same person make comments, kind of about how good it is to
Yeah.
have, the kind of representation we do now, and I've seen him really kind of come around on
oh, that's
a
awesome.
lot of issues like that. Yeah.
It might be nice to have a woman in the Star Wars universe who doesn't have, brown hair and a British accent as the lead. But like, yeah, otherwise,
Yeah, and isn't like 20-ish something. I mean, the thing about representation in Star Wars is like, and this is something that actually kind of drives me nuts about the new trilogy, the post-school trilogy or whatever.
uh-huh.
I know it's a sequel trilogy, or
Right.
what? It's a threequel of sequels. Is like the whole idea is like, well, it's not about the old generation; it's about the new generation. And like, I don't know if that's a separate. That's my own thing. Like, I don't know if that's the story I really want to see. Although I do really like all of the new characters.
Right.
The thing that bothers me is like the central characters are like always so young in Star Wars, and I
Uh-huh.
feel that's this real deliberate I mean, I think there's a couple reasons for that, but it plays into a lot of sort of ageist stereotypes and
I mean, and a lot of that's not
you know,
just Star Wars; it's Hollywood in general. But
it's
certainly, I think
Hollywood, of course.
But I think
Um,
go ahead.
But I think Star Wars is like particularly bad at that one aspect.
I think you're right, and I would have loved because in some ways in here I will say I think Force Awakens was actually a little better at that than this was. Especially because it was an art. I'd never really thought about it this way, and granted, it's a small character in the movie in Force Awakens, but one of the best pieces I saw when Carrie Fisher died, was a woman who wrote a great article. I'll see if I can find it and put it in the show notes, but it should also be easily findable. Um, where she basically said like her hero wasn't Princess Leia, it was General Organa.
Right.
And that the yes, it was a small appearance in the Force Awakens, but having now General Leia Organa be a character in the Force Awakens, that there was something where like the studio wanted the actress to kind of lose weight and to like show that she had and she was like, no, look, I'm a woman of this age, this is what I look like, and that's okay, and that's what Leia would look. Leia isn't going to try to keep General Organa does not have the body that fit into the bikini on Jabba's world,
Right.
And that's
she's not going to use her Force powers to try to age.
yeah, and she shouldn't, and that shouldn't in any way take away from her awesomeness, her attractiveness, her general greatness, in any of those things.
Right.
Not that her attractiveness matters to anyone, but just if it does matter to her, it can,
Sure.
But yeah, I love that in Force Awakens, and you're right. I think that it could have been nice to have a little folks younger in Rogue One. Some folks who weren't all so young in Rogue One.
Well, I mean, it's not that they're all so young. It's that the main character always seems to be, just there, like what's now referred to as new adult fiction.
Right. Well,
because young adult actually doesn't refer to young adults; it refers to teens.
Mm-hmm.
Anyway.
I mean, part of that seems there's obviously a very powerful story trope of the young person who's just becoming an adult, who is sort of like the story is of them having their eyes opened to the way of the world.
Yeah, it's very Hero with a Thousand Faces.
Yeah, exactly, and it's an interesting story, but you're right; it's becoming a bit of a trope in the Star Wars
world.
Yeah,
and I feel like Rogue One would have been the time to not tell that story.
Right.
Like it would have been a time to just be like, yeah, here's a group of seasoned rebels, doing the thing. And I mean, I think the story was great. I really enjoyed it. It's not so much a specific criticism as much as a general thing about representation. One thing, like in terms of like racially or whatever, like they finally had a significant Asian character.
Yep.
Right.
And a significant Latino character.
Yeah. Well, they have that in The Force Awakens. But
true.
Poe.
Yeah, that's true.
Yeah, I think the actor's Guatemalan, I want to say.
He's less obviously. I mean, the simple fact that I didn't remember it. I mean, he is distinctly less obviously Latino than this one with a strong Mexican accent. But yeah, go on.
Right. For sure. But that, I think they did something right in terms of like they finally have an Asian character, and he's like this very stereotypical like kung fu movie sort of character,
right?
In a lot of ways, like the blind martial artist, like that's totally a trope.
Who is spouting wisdom?
Right, exactly, and it's all enlightened and shit. But then they have like his buddy too, who's also Asian and is totally not that stereotype. And so I thought that was a very good way of, like, I don't mind if you have a character who's a bit stereotypical in certain ways, as long as it's not like, a super offensive stereotype that's like inherently like ridiculing a culture or race or sex or whatever. But when you have a character who fits certain stereotypes, I think that can be fine. I think it's often a lot better if you also have another character who doesn't fit those stereotypes from the same sort of group that's represented there, because then it's like it keeps people from being like, oh, that's what everybody from there is like or whatever. And instead of just reinforcing a stereotype, it kind of creates a broader
I mean, I think this
representation.
is the key about tokenism, and this is the
Right.
conversation you and I had for a while about Luke Cage that I thought was so
Yeah.
powerful. Is that like, yeah, if your only black character in a show is a like, very well dressed drug dealer, kind of character, that's really problematic, and he's the only black character, that's really problematic. But if you're
Yeah.
telling a story about an entire, the world of Harlem,
Yeah.
a person like that existing as one of many is somewhat accurate, or like,
Yeah.
as a possibility. Um,
Yeah.
and I think it's why the whole like, you know, there was a great catchphrase I heard about this that I can't remember the exact wording of it. It was something about the line of like, one is never enough. That like, if your goal is to
Yeah.
be more diverse, you have to have at least two of everything, or at least two of
Right.
whatever it
Right.
is. Because
Yeah.
when you have like only, and I will say that was, I thought it was a little odd that like, Jay, she gets this like whole group of people to go fight with her, and on the one hand it's awesome that no one is ever being like, why are we following a woman into combat, but
Right. Right.
it is all dudes. Like it would have been nice if there were a couple of women in that group as well. um
Oh, right. Right. Right.
but that's a small thing
But there
compared.
was also only one droid.
This is true.
Wouldn't it have been
This
nice
is
if there were
true.
like two droids? Like all the other Star Wars movies are like, no, we're not just gonna have one droid. We're gonna have two. A short, silvery white one, and then a tall golden one.
Well, Force Awakens only had BB-8 as like a named like.
R2 showed up,
Yeah, well,
and C3PO was in it. What are you talking about?
NC-3PO and R2 were in Rogue
There was
One.
plenty of droid representation in The Force Awakens, okay?
Okay, I think we're going into a little bit of a rabbit hole here. Um, but maybe this is the political cause we need to dedicate ourselves to. Is
Droid lives matter,
because
you know?
there is that one bar on Tatooine where droids were not allowed. We need to change that.
Yeah.
That's
Yeah, well, there's clear discrimination against droids in the Star Wars universe.
Clearly.
Like, I'm not even joking. Like,
Oh no.
they're clearly sentient, you know?
Oh yeah, and
Like,
I mean, and that's an interest. Like, there's a whole other political question that has never been discussed in any of the Star
yeah,
Wars movies, as far as I know. But I mean, C-3PO gets his brain wiped what, twice, three times in the
yeah,
movie?
right.
Like,
Yeah, they have those restraining bolts that take away their free will,
had,
you know?
have you seen much of Star Trek, especially the new Next Generation?
No, very little.
Okay,
But mostly I'm familiar with the facepalm memes.
okay. The character of Data, who is an android,
Yeah,
there is
I know.
yeah,
Yeah.
there is an episode. There's a number of episodes about these questions, including one where he literally goes to court to sue for his legal rights as a sentient being. Um,
Yeah.
and it's one of the most philosophically interesting bits of science fiction I've ever seen. And it's an interesting question that we've never seen this happen in the Star Wars universe, and would be fun to
Right.
get into. Um, but yeah, overall, I definitely am agreeing with you. I think.
Yeah, I don't even find it an interesting question. I just find it a question where I think most people are probably wrong.
Right.
And, you know,
Um, but
and
but but getting back to the original thing, like I do think, um, I love the fact that we had, a bunch of people in space who are, all different racial backgrounds and all different,
yeah,
representations. And I just like, I love seeing that. And I hope we keep seeing more of it because it's just fun to
I
watch
think
it
we certainly will
to,
from Star Wars. It seems like the direction they're headed.
for sure,
Um,
for sure. And
and
like,
Disney in general, actually.
yeah, they're doing a lot more. I haven't seen Moana yet, but I keep hearing that it's like anything, not perfect, but it, in terms of its cultural, respect
Right.
for the traditions that it's talking about is so much better than anything that people have seen before. So, good directions there. So yeah, that's.
Yeah.
I know we're kind of moving to wrap up. Any other kind of last stuff from the Rogue One movie you wanted to get into?
No, I think we covered the. Oh yeah, well, there's the whole pro-imperialism thing. Maybe that's stuff for another day. Probably not the time to be like, like get into a long philosophical question about how the notion of an empire isn't necessarily the worst thing in the world. It's just it's always that the thing is like the whoever is starting an empire just seems to always be
Not the best.
or at least deeply flawed.
Yeah, I mean, and this is it's what Paul's kind of referring to is some conversations he and I have had about like ideas of democracy versus authoritarianism, and is there some validity to the idea of like having a very smart very benevolent person who is just in charge, and would that be better? And I'm not, I don't think I'm with you in terms of thinking that there's some that could be a good idea, because I don't think I could ever trust a person
Well,
to be,
I think the idea of it being a person
right.
is not. That's a bit of a red herring, I think.
You want the super robot supercomputer.
Well, I don't mean necessarily a person, but a person.
Right.
Like it could be 100 people. It could be
A council,
a council of scientists.
Right.
It could be just that. And it's not so much that I mean I think autocracy is horrible, but it's that I don't think democracy is not horrible, and I don't have a lot of great alternatives. It's just that I think a benevolent, and like what's benevolent, but like yeah, I do. I want to put the droids in charge. I really do. Like, but it's like I want to program them. I don't want someone else to program them. So
yeah, that's not quite a last minute topic to dive into, but certainly
it's not.
Something.
We'll wait till they make a new Terminator movie.
I will say, if you get a chance, there's a book by Robert Heinlein, who I'm not a fan of. A lot of people really are, but he talks about exactly these kind of questions, called "The Moon is a Harsh Mistress." And in that book, one of the ideas is that there's kind of a supercomputer that's put in charge because it's so much smarter than the rest of the people. And it's I disagree with a lot of it, but I know a lot of people who kind of have perspectives like what you're talking about love that book, because their perspective is, this is the idea of like, the smartest, most scientifically minded people being in charge is better than stupid people democracy. And well, for the most part, I'm very much on the democracy. I would suggest that recent events have made me a little bit skeptical about the wisdom of the people in all things. So there's some room for discussion there. But
I mean, clearly democracy can fail itself, can fail its people.
Exactly. And that's
I have a closing note.
Okay, and I do as well. Let me make mine, and then I'll let you make yours, because you should have the last word. But I'll say, again, that was another thing that I think the movies, that the prequels hinted at, but they got so wrong, which is such a problem because it could have been done so much better, which is the fact that Palpatine becomes emperor through a completely legitimate, legal, democratic process. Exactly like people often forget Hitler was elected, and then Hitler became chancellor, like, the whole Reichstag fire, like he caused some events to happen illegally, but the constitutional process was absolutely followed to make Hitler chancellor, and the Republic's constitutional process was absolutely followed to make Palpatine emperor. And I think that's something people have to remember, of like the fact that like someone is elected by the legal means of the electoral college and all this, like that doesn't mean it's legitimate, because sometimes those systems can be totally abused.
Yeah, the systems, I mean, when you have a system designed in the 1700s, like, that doesn't mean it's going to be the best system to follow in, the next millennium.
Mm-hmm.
It doesn't, and just because the rules say, oh, this is the way things should go, doesn't mean that's the way things should go.
Yep.
It's like, oh, but they hate the game, not the player. Okay, well, I'll hate both.
Exactly.
I'm not sure that was really applicable, but I just like saying that.
I appreciate it. So what's your final note?
Oh, it's just a totally, it's a role-playing game note that once upon a time, someone came up with some setting where the world was ruled by a supercomputer, and somehow all the rebels had lightsabers. That's basically all I remember.
Okay.
So, it's it seemed relevant to where we were heading.
Lightsabers against robots. I like that. Cool.
Yeah.
So what is Paul? I know you've been mostly playing poker out there, but trying to get some creative stuff going again. Are you doing more writing? Is there ways people can find stuff you're creating?
Yes. Visit my website, zenmadman.com, and hopefully it'll have some stuff by the time this podcast is up. I'll race you to it.
Awesome. Good idea. And like I said, I'm hopefully going to have an article out soon on the superhero ethics blog um, on Commissioner Gordon and Batman and like what that means for modern politics. And I'll hopefully, I'm going to promise that that'll be up by next Tuesday because we're trying to get something out once a week. As Paul and I said, we're both in kind of crazy life situations with moving, so we will probably not be podcasting quite as often as we'd like. But we got this one 2 weeks after the last one. I think we're hope for at least every 2 weeks, and maybe something written in between then. In the meantime, though, please check out older episodes and articles on superheroethics.com. And also, please talk to us. We would love to be in the conversation with you guys about these things. What did you think about Rogue One? What did you think worked? What didn't you work? What would you do if you were that engineer and had the chance to maybe help or not help build the Death Star? What do you think he should have done? Would love to hear. You can tweet at us at Superhero Ethics. You can also find us on Facebook, Superhero Ethics on Facebook. Let us know. Post anywhere in those places. And mostly just keep listening and tell your friends about it. We are seeing these numbers grow, which is really exciting for how many people are listening to the podcast, and keep expecting to see it get better. So, on behalf of myself, on behalf of Paul, thank you everyone for taking part, and have a great day.